In this video, I'm going to provide an overview on how you can create custom properties and assign them to your Rhino geometry using the Semantic plugin. Semantic is a plugin for Rhino that introduces a data management interface. This allows you to create custom groupings of properties, assign them to Rhino objects, and manage the data over time as you begin to design different objects inside of Rhino. Now, Rhino out of the box exposes some great tools for developing geometry in a free-form and flexible manner. We wanted to pair the Rhino modeling environment with a flexible data structure that can be used to assign different attributes and properties and classifications on top of those objects, so Rhino geometry can start to exhibit some BIM-like behavior within the design process. Common applications of this may be doing something with massing and planning in an early stage of design. So here you can see we have a number of surfaces defined inside of Rhino that indicate floors. This is loosely developed. It's just kind of describing the overall geometry of a building. We have some kind of text here indicating different levels, and these are simply surfaces that have been trimmed away from a mass inside of Rhino. Now, these objects themselves exhibit very little data beyond their geometric representation. We know that we can assign these to layers. We might even leverage things like the name field inside of the properties. But within the context of Rhino 6, this is typically as far as one might take a geometry, minus some use of Grasshopper and other plugins to maybe append different geometry and data information on top of these objects. So what we wanted to do with Semantic is introduce a data management layer, and we can access Semantic by typing in Semantic panel inside of the command line, which exposes a dockable interface that can sit alongside your property windows and layers. And essentially it's tailored to the idea that we can add in another dimension of data, so this data can become integrated on top of the objects, as well as integrated into the document itself for kind of global property control. So when we first start Semantic in a document like this, you'll notice that there are no properties to any of the objects. It's because we haven't defined or created any in this particular document. At the very bottom of the form, you can see that there is a toggle to activate what we call a class manager. A class inside of Semantic refers to a grouping of certain properties. This might be related to a building program, or it might be related to some fabrication constraints. But effectively, they are these groupings of properties that we can define. Out of the box, there are a couple of default classes that we've created here, and these allow us to track some kind of internal property. In the case of objects, that refers to things like areas or lengths when referring to surfaces or curves. We found this kind of especially helpful when thinking about how often the area command is used in the design process. When you're kind of developing a building and you want to get the overall square area of a project, you might want to use the area command to just get an overall idea of the area. Well, these internal properties allow us to automate that process. So what I'm going to do is, first thing I'm going to do right out of the gate here is I'm going to right click and select objects for these floor outlines. These are the surface boundaries indicating floors. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign them to the internal object properties. And what this is going to do is it's going to expose inside of Semantic these internal properties for area and length. And where we find this useful, even if you did nothing else, is be able to select any of the objects that are subscribed to this internal class and get a report of the area. So I can click on any of these surfaces and boom, I have the area. And if I select multiple surfaces, like so, you can see that those areas are being added up. So we're starting to see this kind of behavior in the interface that starts to describe a specific property set, in this case, the computation of area. Now, Semantic can go way beyond this concept of area reporting, and we can start to add what we call a new class. You can see this little plus sign at the bottom of the semantic classes form. If I click on that, you can see that I can add an object class. And an object class allows me to establish a new grouping of properties that I might want my objects to contain. In this case, I'm going to name my class building program. And this is going to refer to the kind of classification of space and other attributes that might be related to the overall functioning of a particular building design. You can see that I have applicable Rhino object types. You can see that we're supporting BREPs, curves, points, and meshes. In this case, I'm only going to be concerned about BREPs, so I'm going to uncheck the rest of these. There's really little harm in leaving them all checked, but for the sake of specificity, I'm going to say I only want this class of properties to apply to BREPs. I can then go through the process of adding different properties to this class. So you can see that we have the option to add text properties, number properties, category properties, Boolean properties, and date properties. I'm going to start really simply with some text properties. I'm going to open the property editor, and you can see that I can first name my property, and maybe I want to call this property the program name, for example, and I can choose a default value for the program name, and maybe I'll call this complex 1, like so. I can also do what's called lookups, and what lookups do is they basically provide, as you start to add new text values, they will be added in to a running list. So if as you're typing things in a data entry format, this running list will allow you to kind of select from some previously entered data. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And so I have this overall program name. Next, I'm going to add in a number parameter. And this number parameter is going to be reflective of maybe a cost per square foot. So I'm going to call this cost SF. And I'm going to go ahead and add a value of 200. And then I'm going to change the number format to refer to dollars. So this will be like a currency representation. You can see that under the number editor, I also have this ability to establish a slider type of interface. So instead of having this be a data entry interface, maybe I want it to be a slider. I'll come back to this when we add a document property. Go ahead and save that. I'm now going to add what we call a category property. A category property is a fixed drop-down list interface. So here I'm going to define a department, and I'm going to start adding in a series of fixed list department names. So I'm going to call one office, I'm going to call one residential, I'm going to call one hotel, I'm going to call one retail, and I'm going to call one circulation, like so. So now I have this fixed list that I can refer back to. And what I also might want to do is change up the color a little bit on these. So I'm going to adjust the color settings of these fields. Like so, just give these a little bit of a distinguishing color for each of these objects here. So now I have some color selections there. I'm going to go ahead and save this. I'm going to add another category property called building. And this is going to refer to, in my complex here, I have several buildings. So maybe we have building A. We might have building B. And we might have building C. And again, I'm going to go ahead and distinguish each of these buildings based on a color. And we'll see why this is important in just a second here as we get into some of the visualization pieces. So now we have a grouping of properties that we can start to assign to different objects. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And this will then be listed under the internal object class called a building program. And at the moment, we don't have any of these objects assigned to the building program. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is right-click and select the uh, objects for my floors, and I'm going to go ahead and assign them to the building program. And what that's going to do is it's going to subscribe each of those geometric objects to that class of properties. And if I click on one of my objects now, you can see that we have our parameters exposed. So we have something called complex 1. This is a building, the overall maybe program name that I'm utilizing here, and that's a text property. I also have cost per square foot represented as 200 US dollars. I also have a department as a drop-down selectable list, and I also have building as a drop-down selectable list. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and close my semantic classes for the time being, and I'm just going to go through this process of labeling my floors and kind of assigning them different properties. So I'm going to go ahead and select my floor outline objects, and I'm going to inverse hide some of the roof structures, and we can also see that we've got our context on, so I'm going to go ahead and hide that just so I have this stuff isolated a little bit more. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to find different groupings of objects, and you can kind of see I've got these are all under one homogeneous layer, but there are some objects here that are clearly like a core. So I might want to call those out as circulation. So you can see I'm just kind of going through and clicking on those objects there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the department of those from office to circulation. So we have that. I'm also going to go through the process of maybe selecting a couple of these top floors here, and I say, you know what, I want to make these residential. So I'm starting to override and differentiate the property selection. So if I select one of these down here, you can see that I've got office, and if I click up here, that one's now residential. If I want to visualize this a little bit more easily, I can go to my internal, with nothing selected, I'm going to go to my internal properties here and choose department. And what that's going to do is it's going to override the color of my objects inside of the viewport, so I can clearly see how they're mapping to different properties, and they're inheriting the colors as being described by the department categories that we defined in Semantic. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of continue this exercise. I'm going to select maybe these floors here, and I'm going to call them hotel. So now we have kind of a residential set of floors, hotel set of floors. I'm going to go ahead and select some of these here. And I'm going to call these the office. We'll leave those as office. Maybe these bottom ones here we can refer to as a retail level, like so. And what I'm going to do here is you can also see that I've got maybe some leftover spaces kind of hidden around in there, and maybe I'll turn those into a circulation set as well. So there's a little bit of a even further definition of those. So we've got one building here now being classified by department, and just for the expediting this process, I'm going to go ahead and select these objects here, and I'm going to turn those into retail as well. So this building will be primarily the retail, and then maybe this is an offshoot office structure over here. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that office. It's already been assigned to office, and then you have those there, and I'm going to go ahead and take those circulation. So we've got this kind of build up now of department level information in our building, kind of representing this department level. So what I want to do now is maybe even add in another dimension to this. So we've got department, but maybe what about building? So I'm going to go ahead and toggle my internal preview to building, and everything right now is classified as the same building. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a grouping of these floors and break them up based on their building name. So right now this will be building, we'll call this one building B. And you can see I'm missing a floor there, so maybe I'll call that one building B as well. And then this one here I will call building A. I've got that already classified as building A. And then this grouping here we'll call building C. So we now have this even kind of further breakdown of information where, I could go by layer. This gives me my original layer color. I can go by department, see the previewing of department level layers and classifications, and then building. So it allows me to, quickly toggle back and forth between these, different categorical representations. There's another way that we can start to toggle between different category visualizations as well. If I click on one of these floors, and I'll kind of expand the semantic window a little bit, you can see that we've got this bullet toggle kind of radio button next to department and building, and these are unique to the kind of category properties where I can kind of jump between these two different categories so I can see the color outcome essentially. Then if I wanted to go all the way back up and say, I don't want this to be by layer, I can kind of jump between these like so. Pretty convenient. What I can do now is, now that I've defined a series of object level properties, there's another type of property that I can add into my document called a document level property. And a document level property are kind of like this kind of internal preview property that we have here. This kind of comes out of the box where I can see how to toggle between some of the categories. I can add a document level property by going to the plus sign in the lower left hand corner there and click add document class. And I'm going to call this the project info. And this will be a kind of an overall global set of project information related to my document. And I'm going to go ahead and add in a few properties here. I'm going to add in a project name, like so. And I'm going to add in something like maybe a project number. Maybe I want to add in a number parameter here for target cost. So this might be an overall project budget. Maybe I'll call it project budget, like so. And maybe this is an $80 million project. I'm going to change this to a number with a $sign there. So we've got a kind of a default value, and that will be represented as that number. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And then maybe I want to add in a number parameter that is contingency, like so. And I'm going to set the default value at 1. Number format I can leave the same. I'm going to expose a slider interface like so, and kind of add a maximum value of 2. So we might go 200% or some fraction of a contingency factor that might control project cost, for example. I'm going to hit save. So now we have this like list of document level properties. I'm going to go ahead and hit save on those. And what that's going to do is it's going to expose this set of properties here in the semantic window. I'm going to go ahead and hit close. And you can see that I can start to adjust things like the contingency factor on a slider. It seems that my value here did not stick, so I can just add that in there, and that will be formatted correctly. Maybe this is a mixed use complex, and then maybe this project number is going to be something like so. So this becomes kind of a document level property reference. Each of these kind of groupings also have nice expanders and collapsers that allow us to manage this. But now we've started to build up for this particular Rhino model a set of properties that are being layered on top of the Rhino geometry. You note that none of this impacts how I might describe a piece of geometry. I can still model freely within Rhino. I'm just now adding in this very kind of defined data layer that allows me to give different types of meaning and reporting characteristics to these objects. So in this video, we covered the idea of taking a starter set of geometry, defining custom object properties using Semantic, And we looked at a variety of those different types of properties you can create, including text-based, numeric-based, and categorical-based properties. We also added a series of project parameters to the overall document as well, so we could start to track project level information. So hopefully this is a helpful introduction to just the idea of creating custom properties inside of Rhino and assigning them to objects using the Semantic plugin.